Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the D2C Summit, India's largest D2C and e commerce conference. I'm Vinny, and I'm going to be hosting you on this stage today. I hope you didn't miss Yuvraj Singh talk about his journey from the world of cricket to the world of startups. The tips shared for celebrity management were definitely noteworthy for upcoming brands and startups. In case you did miss it, you can always tune in to the D2C Academy and rewatch the session. Now, circling back to what we have in store for you here. India's D2C economy has taken an accelerated growth trajectory, and the growing market is proof enough. The numbers keep on growing, be it brands or investors or products or customers. But why does this ever growing $100 billion industry need a sustainable approach? Why should D2C brands make sustainability a significant reason for customers to love their brands? To answer these questions in detail, we have Kamaljeet Singh, Managing Partner and Founder, Fireside Ventures, joined by Nupur Garg, Founder, WinPay. Hi, Kamaljeet and Nupur, and welcome to the D2C Summit.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you,
looking
Vinny.
forward to this session. Nupur, the stage is all yours.
Thanks again, Vinny. Hi, Kamal. Great to be chatting here. And I can't, think of a person other than you, better than you, to be having this conversation with. So let's start. Let's get into it. We're already behind schedule. So let's set the context first. Now, back in 2017, Schroders conducted a survey on 22,000 investors. And that survey highlighted that 78% respondents felt that sustainable investing was becoming more important, and 64% had increased their sustainable investments over the previous years. Now, correspondingly, on the customer side, a recent study by PwC found that 54% customers seek out products with eco friendly packaging or less packaging. 56% choose products with a traceable, transparent origin. 55% buy from companies that protect the environment. And 53% are buying more biodegradable, eco friendly products. So, both investor and customers are clearly showing an intent to focus on sustainability and on sustainability businesses, especially in the consumer brand space. Kamal, the question for you is, what is responsible investment, and how can businesses, consumer brands, and or D2C brands look at this?
Thanks, Nupur, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me for this really important panel. I am, personally very excited, privileged, honored to be here because this is the kickoff for this session. Then it's a very important conversation to have in the current times. So, just to get started on this conversation, Nupur, I think the narrative for being much more conscious as an investor about what we call responsible investing and about looking at issues around the areas of environment, around areas of society, around the area of governance are becoming almost center stage today. Not because it's some kind of a marketing spiel or something that we need to talk about more for brand building purposes, but it's the need of the hour. And we are realizing that there are two critical things which need to be addressed almost simultaneously. One is the entire impact on environment and therefore sustainability, therefore looking at issues like plastic neutrality, looking at waste management, climate change, etc. And the second is also how we conduct ourselves both as businesses and as investors, which impact society and the planet and the people in general. And obviously, without losing sight of the profit. So I think this triple P, as it's being called now, the planet, the people, and the
Yeah.
profit, is becoming almost part of narrative. And the good news is that it's not just the large corporates or some of the big global brands which are taking the lead on this. A lot of young companies in their own way are starting to realize that this is important to them, not just because of the need to do this, but also, like you just quoted, there are consumers who are actually demanding some of these changes, some of these requirements in the brands they consume. So it's actually a proven data fact now, and there is a lot of data coming out through research where consumers are choosing to buy products which are more sustainable, which are more natural, which are less harmful to the environment, and in some sense they are looking at being good for not just the company and the brand but also for the planet and the people which live around it. So I think that's the conversation which needs to happen, and forums like this become very important for all of us to reflect on, saying while we are building great businesses, how do we absorb and in some sense imbibe the discipline of what this particular ESG consciousness is all about. Coming to your question about responsible investing, I think what we are seeing is that there is a lot of value and a lot of opportunity for investors like us and the global investment community in general can play a very proactive role in not only how we conduct ourselves, but also how we engage with our companies. And there are several layers which we are discovering, and we are also, going down this path of, how do we engage in these principles of responsible investing. First of all, there are guidelines which have been provided by organizations like the United Nations, and more, over 3,500 signatories globally have signed up for what is called principles of responsible investing, so that you are accountable and responsible to govern yourself and work with your companies on that. So a lot of the narrative, the questions being asked to companies before an investment are actually on the grounds of saying, what are your policies regarding environment, regarding your inclusivity metrics, regarding your societal metrics, and of course, your governance metrics. Second thing is that what is the approach as an investor we take in our diligence of evaluating a company. And I think that's becoming very important, that not only do we look at the company from their business model, not only do we look at the company from their financial and their legal documentation and diligence, but also evaluate them on parameters of ESG. And decisions of investing are more and more getting guided by frameworks which include ESG as a part of that thing. So once again, for a lot of people who are in the audience today, especially entrepreneurs, it is something that not only do you have to be conscious about yourself to, because you want to make a change, and I think that's the most important lesson or learning that everybody needs to absorb, but also the fact that investors are asking for some of these parameters. So I think that's one big piece of responsible investing that is becoming almost like a imperative today for any form of investment. The second piece is the role as investors we can play in helping companies in moving up the ladder. So as companies are growing, as companies are moving from very early stage startups where we typically come in as an investor to the next stage of growth to then establishing a much larger footprint and business, there are different levels of actions and activities that need to be done to continuously build your own internal programs around ESG. And once again, as investors, we have started developing ecosystem of partners, partners like yourself, for example. And then, of course, people who are working on recycling of plastic, people who are working on, providing products which are, less harmful to the environment, working on agendas like, gender diversity, etc. And that then is a collaborative program that we work with our companies. So we start by saying, what is our policy for responsible investing? We then do due diligence on a company, saying, does it meet the cut? Can we invest in a company which is at least has the minimum standard that we expect on the grounds of ESG as much as the business parameters? And then how can we work with them? So it's a continuum which almost requires a very collaborative, very partnership approach. And as we go down the conversation, we can talk a little bit about some examples of some of our companies and how they have acted. But what I would love to engage and get your perspective is, since you have very exclusively started focusing on gender diversity and building a very strong platform to bring about the whole gender diversity initiative. What has been your experience, and what is your insight into specifically targeting that aspect of it?
Thanks, Kaval. So, Kaval, when I first realized that gender is not part of ESG in a typical ESG framework that is globally accepted, I was quite surprised. I thought, for a long time, I thought it would be covered in governance or it would be covered in social, but really, not only gender, but even diversity and inclusion per se, which is a much broader canvas than gender itself, are not part of ESG. And if we look at the world around us, if we look at global markets and how we are syncing with the world around us, I think DNI is a very, very important thing to think about. And within DNI, I think gender is almost like the elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed because, women are roughly 50% of the population. They're roughly 50% of the workforce. And if you're not able to include half of our workforce, it is going to be very, very difficult for us to get to a place where we are able to, work side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the other minorities. So, that is why I thought gender is probably the best place to start the conversation with, because once we create, bring about that change in culture, we, sort of bring about enough objectivity to eliminate unconscious biases. Because, see, I don't think it is people here who have a problem. I think it is the stereotypes and the unconscious biases that we are brought up with that really create an impact on on the composition of our teams and on the composition of our workforce. So if you just look at numbers, we're talking BBC here. This data is has been constant for the last 4 years. Women are roughly 7 to 8% of senior investment professionals in PVC firms. Okay. And capital to women-led businesses at a global level, and especially in the US, ranges between 2.3 to 2.5%. In India, it has seen higher levels, but those higher levels have been limited to 4%. So again, it is not it's not saying much. And then, research has found that the gender imbalance in an investment team influences the gender imbalance in companies in the investors' portfolio. So there is a direct correlation. If you have more women as investors, the probability of you having more women founders and co-founders and entrepreneurs in your portfolio, it's there is a direct correlation there. So clearly, if you think about how the industry work, you're really talking about the conversation flowing down through the capital chain, but also through the engagement. So, as LPs, when we look at investing in funds, we also always talk about the multiplier effect. You back one fund, that fund will back 10, 15, 20 companies. So you're basically multiplying your influence. And I think the conversation on gender needs to move the same way if we have to really bridge the gaps that exist. So, the World Economic Forum said that it will take more than 200 years to bridge the gender pay gap. And, I don't want to wait for 200 years. So we have to accelerate the effort. So I think working with investors and especially investors like you, who already have a significant composition of women-led companies in your portfolio, is really the way forward, because that's how we spread the conversation ahead. So, Kamal, if I can ask you a question here. We were talking about ESG, we are talking about DNI. Um, there are a lot of these things that are flowing downwards from LPs. ESG for a long time was a DFI-led initiative, and I have had that experience myself of convincing fund managers why they needed to follow, the performance standards or the ESG principles. You think things like ESG, things like gender, when they become mandated like this, there is a risk of greenwashing, if we can use that term here. And if there is a risk like that, how can we avoid it?
So, I think short answer is that the reality of the matter being that there is some element of that already happening. So, as a value chain, our business is we raise money from LPs, then we invest in companies, and wherever there is that point of pressure or what is expected to be the right answers, everybody tries to align to that. So I will certainly be the first one to admit that there is some element of, as you called it, greenwashing that does happen. I think what is changing, and pleasantly so, which personally, if you ask me, has been my personally, most satisfying element over the last 20 years as an investor, is the consciousness of some of our entrepreneurs, and especially the younger entrepreneurs, people who are grown up in the current generation, the millennials as we call them, of wanting to be thoughtful, wanting to be conscious, and therefore aware and proactive about how they are addressing some of these issues. So in a way, it's the reverse pressure. So like the value chain that you described is LP, fund, and then entrepreneur, and we are almost taking what is expected from the LPs down and passing it to the entrepreneurs. But here it's the reverse flow, which is probably the most exciting discovery or exciting trend that is happening, where the entrepreneurs have come up and they have said that we want to put programs into place. I'll take a few examples, and obviously some of these are our portfolio companies. So, the idea is just to highlight how it works. So we have a company called Vadam Teas, run by a very young entrepreneur in his early 30s. When he started, he was mid 20s, Bala. And he, from day one, had this belief that he wants to address some of these issues of environment, of equality, of societal give back. So, what he has done is, first of all, he takes a percentage of the revenue that he generates, revenue, not the profit. And he is deploying that to educate the children of the tea pickers. It's a tea business, they sell in global markets, but he wants to give back to the community which is providing him with these high quality teas which are being sold in all the markets like US, Europe, etc. And that percentage of money, which is a meaningful number, is going back to educate the children so that their next generation improves in terms of their lot in life. The company has been plastic neutral for the last several years. They are now working with global organizations to reduce carbon emission and make themselves carbon neutral. Now, all of this coming from a young, late 20s, early 30-year-old is actually inspirational for us. And like I keep telling, my team, I keep telling everybody I talk to, is let's not think about, whether one initiative like this is good enough or will it make an impact. I mean, let's celebrate every effort. And if the collective consciousness of this generation of entrepreneurs starts responding to this kind of a need of the hour, I think that's really the groundswell which will change the conversation. What we have to do as investors is really take the conversation at the highest level. So at our board conversation, at our business review meetings, how much of time do we spend in asking the question and in reviewing the statement? So that is one critical part of not taking it as a lip service or greenwash, as you called it. Second thing is that something that we are starting to do is actually have accountability at our end. So we have got somebody in our team who's come in to actually lead the initiative of ESG within Fireside. And we also felt that it was important enough to call it out, important enough to have dedicated resource who can not only provide the diligence and the frameworks for how we should work, but how can we help the companies. So we actually are working with programs for recycling. There are companies which actually collect plastic waste from homes, and they create products like shrink wrapping papers and outer packaging, etc., which are then put back into the consumer industry. So that's the second piece which we believe is very critical. And I think eventually it is really this groundswell which will derive and deliver the big picture story, rather than something that is being mandated and we have to check box things. But I honestly believe that we have no opportunity to escape this mandate, even if we want to call it that, because the situation is becoming more dire and more desperate, and there is no question that every one of us has to address it. And that's why I said right in the beginning that having forum like these, where we are talking about brands, we are talking about business issues, we are talking about opportunity, and India is becoming a big $100 billion hub for D2C brands. But opening a session with sustainability, with ESG, and inclusivity as a consciousness, to me is a great positive step forward.
I completely agree, Kamal. I think all of us have to come together, not only investors, but like you said, entrepreneurs and the consumers. All of us have to come together. And, when we are talking about greenwashing, I'm reminded of this one example, which for me was in many ways, I think, the first step to really understanding how to integrate ESG. So, this was a renewable energy business, which was setting up a plant in Rajasthan near Jaisalmer.
Okay.
So it checked all the boxes, right? Renewable energy, etc., etc. But for its business, it was going to use groundwater.
Okay.
And the water table in that area was already low. And in using the groundwater, while it was an RE business and it was all green, it was going to further deplete the groundwater level to, undesired levels. So, so what do you say here? It checks some boxes, but it creates new boxes. And I think when I first looked at this particular example, I really started to think about the difference between adopting ESG and really mainstreaming it and integrating it into every part of not only investing, but also every part of how you operate your business. And, for me, gender diversity is something similar. It is about how we hire. It is about how we assess and how we promote talent. It is about how we invest. It is not about just investing in women-led businesses. I think it is much more than that. And again, it's really exciting to be talking to somebody like you who's really integrated this thought process internally. But it's the two of us, and there are a number of challenges that still remain. So, should we talk about a few challenges? What do you think are some of the biggest, most glaring challenges that we face?
So, honestly, I would still see it as glass half full than half empty. Now, challenges, for example, from a very practical business sense, like I said in the earlier part of the conversation, a lot of people will say, "Oh, what difference can I make? I am a small organization, and I have to worry about cash flow. I have to worry about my business imperative." So, my simple comment to every one of the people who are asking this question is two things. One is it's actually good for us as a business to be conscious about these things. And there is data, and what you quoted right in the beginning, that consumers today are standing up, especially the younger generation, and saying, I will not buy a product which is animal tested. I will not buy a product which I know has uses child labor. I will not buy a product which is not based on fair trade practices or which is harmful to society. So people are actually, standing up and asking for change and willing to put their mouth where their money is. So in a sense, to me, that first challenge is about mindset and about taking that first step. And I think there is a business reason to do it. Second challenge is, every step you take potentially has some implications on profitability or on cost or pricing. And that's again one of the questions we see from a lot of the younger companies saying, listen, we want to do it, it's important, we understand it, but if I change my packaging from all plastic to recycled plastic, my cost goes up. And my answer to that is that, first of all, there are opportunities to even take a cost hit on some of these initiatives, build it into your marketing messaging, and actually ask the consumer to pay for that extra cost. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised that consumers are willing to pay that little bit extra. I mean, you can't charge them 100% more than market price, but you say, listen, give me 20% more because I am giving you a more sustainable solution. I think that's one option.
Yeah.
Second option is what people like us can do. And like I said earlier, we have now people in house who are working with some of these partners on looking at solutions which can be price competitive but still more sustainable, whether it's replacing single use plastic with better forms with at least some element of reusable plastic or recyclable plastic. Looking at, how do we create plastic neutral solutions? How do we monitor the carbon footprints and carbon emissions of companies to give them a sense of like what is their current state of how they are actually running their business and what they can do about it. So I think the challenge to me at the highest level is mindset
Yeah.
and belief in the fact that you need to do it. Once you decide to do it, things, we never said we will, focus on women entrepreneurs, because to me that was never a business logic to do it. But the fact that we were conscious of the fact that, we also want to be very, fair about how we evaluate, and we don't want a negative bias saying if it's a woman founder we should not invest. And obviously, the business we are in, we find that there is a very strong affinity of this combination of women and men as co-founders. 50% of our founders are women, and it's again something we celebrate at every possible occasion, not because it is something that we designed it like that, but because we were conscious of the fact that we would, actively, promote the idea if we find that there is a strong team of, a combination of either male and female founders, or even we have situations where we have single women founders, we have situations we have two sisters as founders. So it's really about, opening up your mind to take the first step, and that first step can be anything small. I mean, again, just to give you an example, one of our companies is a company called Slurp Farm, and they decided again, much like the earlier example, to contribute 1% of their revenue to an organization called Akshay Patra, where they are feeding, children in government schools at a very large scale. We have Mama Earth, where they are actually helping tree plantation. For every product that you buy, they contribute a certain amount of money and actually plant a tree in the name of the consumer who's bought from them. So these are, examples which are not rocket science or earth-shattering examples, but they all add up to that collective consciousness which I was talking about. And that's
Yeah.
really my hope, that, this message translates to the hundreds or thousands of people who are, listening into our conversation, to say, let's make a start. Let's celebrate those little wins. And how do we take it to the next level? And I think the collective is really what will create the groundswell, and not necessarily some big government mandate or some, senior authority coming and telling you to do this.
And I think what I love about these examples, Kamal, so if you look at Slurp, that their vision is to provide healthy food and nutrition to children, and you link that to their effort to feed children in government schools, right? So you sort of see that it is very much in sync with their ethos behind starting the business, and I think that really resonates with consumers as well. And similarly for Mama Earth, yes, I mean, till you can't find a substitute to plastic to sell your soaps in, how do you counter that? You counter that by trying to plant trees. So I think it's exciting to note that young entrepreneurs are focusing on this, and I would love to get into more details with some of these founders at some point of time. Like you said, the consumer business really has a very strong affinity to women per se. And the consumer sector could actually go forward to become some sort of a case study, not only having women at the helm as founders, co-founders, and CEOs, but also across the workforce and say R&D, product design, market design, because you are speaking to an audience which is women. Maybe integrate more women-led businesses into the supply chain, and I think there are some women entrepreneurs who are starting to think about integrating women into the supply chain, but seems to be largely in the apparel and textile area. That's just my understanding. But maybe that's another way we can bring this whole consciousness to the next level. And early stage businesses, this is the time you start integrating the ESG concept. You start integrating the emphasis on DNI into the DNA at this stage. And I just wanted to share this data, which I think can one of the more compelling, objective ways of thinking about diversity. So there is data that says that gender balanced investment teams deliver a 20% higher IRR than the median. There is data which says that when there is gender balance in leadership teams at portfolio companies, they generate approximately 25% greater increases in valuations. There is also data which says when funds are managed by gender balanced teams, they outperform in terms of TVPI multiples. And then, of course, we all know that markets, consumers, investors, everybody are asking for more responsible businesses. And my own request is that somebody redefine responsible and integrate DNI into the definition of responsible, because we have to be thinking about half the world that is really holding the sky up on their shoulders.
Totally agree with you, and I think the fact that the data you're quoting is certainly not a surprise to me. And some of our most successful businesses that we have seen, and I have worked with over the last several years, have very high mix of not only women founders but senior women employees and part of the management and leadership teams. So I think for us, it's almost like a day in the office to believe in the concept that gender equality and having a good mix of gender is actually a positive influence on the outcomes, rather than something we have to again do as a checkbox. But again, I would love to get a little bit perspective from you. There's so much talk about, like you said, ESG is the hot button right now, and everybody talks of it. The whole aspect of gender and gender diversity and equality is not that common.
Yeah.
What are practical things that can be done by young startups, by investors like us, to actually take conscious steps in promoting and obviously correcting some of these stark data that you quoted in the beginning about how few women founders are there, or how few women founders get funded, or even in the investment world there are so few women. Is there some let's call it playbook or framework which could help all of us, including the entrepreneurs who are listening in?
Absolutely happy to share what we have learned through Vinpi. I mean, we've worked with a lot of firms, both investing firms, fund managers, and with PVC-backed companies. So there is some sense of what has worked for people. But like you said, the starting point is really commitment right at the top. So there has to be a conscious commitment, and I think it has to be an explicit stated commitment. You need to put it on paper. You need to put words to it and put it out there to say, I am committed to building a diverse organization. And that really is the starting point, because it is a top-down agenda. Very similar to ESG, gender as a top-down agenda. I think the other thing is once you have this consciousness, again, like you said, you have to take explicit steps to try and bring more objectivity in your processes and eliminate biases. And yes, there are a lot of sensitization and awareness trainings and unconscious bias trainings, and that helps. But what is really institutional is to simply say, for example, in recruitment practices, what we've done with our member firms is to say that we will mandate a certain level of diversity in the candidate pipeline. Beyond that, only merit. Because ultimately, if you have enough women in the pipeline, by their own merit, you know, there is a reasonable probability of them making it to the final list. I mean, I look at my own experience, and I sort of say 1% of my candidate pipeline used to be women. There was 0% chance that they'll ever make it to the final list. But at least if there are 30 to 40% women in the candidate pipeline, you know that you will find at least a couple who are good. The other is, when you're screening, how do you eliminate unconscious biases? So maybe some blind screening methods, case studies, for example, redacting CVs. When you have a database that people filter by in Excel, just remove the names, and nobody asks for gender anymore, but you can remove names which are indicative of the gender, and just screen by the objective matrices: last job, educational experience, profile, whatever are your own preferred matrices, but to try and bring more objectivity in how we screen and how we evaluate. So similarly in performance assessment, I think there is a lot about fill in your performance evaluation yourself and saying how did you do a good job. And there is enough research that says men and women communicate their achievements very differently. And then, managers usually complete an appraisal form which says, do you think the candidate did a good job? So you're letting a lot of subjectivity come in, which can get, not only can, I think, which definitely gets influenced by whatever unconscious biases we are all born and brought up with. So to bring in more objective um, measurement matrices across all processes, I think is the institutional way of doing this. But yes, culture is key, but culture is a longer term process. But when you have more institutional processes, you sort of emphasize to people that it is not about the person, but it is about their performance. So don't focus on the individual, focus on the individual's work. And some of these will naturally then lend themselves to building a more merit-based culture and a more objective, gender-neutral culture. Gender-neutral policies like not just having maternity benefits, but paternity benefits. So, maternity leave is not something that is offered specially to women, right? But paternity benefits, it's, even men are entitled to take time off. Even men should be able to bring their children to childcare or to a creche, etc. So there are a number of these simple things that organizations can do. But I think it really does start with commitment right at the top, explicitly stated. And it has to be supported with active measurement, because measurement is the first step to understanding where exactly you stand. When
Absolutely.
numbers and percentages flash in front of your eyes, you sort of know, okay, how good or bad we are. And then measurement is the way to also track progress, whether we have been able to make impact or not.
Absolutely. The other thing which I strongly believe in is, giving very simple measurement matrices. Because, we have seen, especially in the startup world, when you're starting a business, even to define what business metric should I measure is an area where, entrepreneurs will look for help and look for guidance. And as a recourse, we typically would have standard templates of saying, okay, if you're a D2C brand, here are the things you need to measure, your CAC, your ROAS, your this, that, and the other. But putting a little bit extra effort, saying, okay, here are the metrics around your ESG parameters. There are metrics around your diversity parameters. That itself can become a very simple framework, because my belief is
Absolutely.
that it's not something that people don't want to do. It's something that needs a little bit of more framework. And that whole, almost like, ESG is such a big vast topic that I get
Yes.
overwhelmed when I think of it, and I'll think of it someday later in the future of my journey. Breaking it down into very simple few things. In fact, what we are attempting to do at Fireside is actually creating a like a playbook, where we are saying, okay, when you're starting a business, here are 4 or 5 things you should be conscious about. When you reach a certain size stage of business, which, let's say the 0 to 10 journey, you need to then start adding a few extra layers to it. The 10 to 100, here is more consciousness that you need to bring in. So actually defining some simple things, and then just celebrating small successes. I think all of this then leads back to what you call culture. It leads back to the measurement, leads back to a positivity around the concept. So I think that's, to me, probably as important an aspect of not getting overwhelmed by this big
Completely.
ESG as a construct, but just doing a few things right, and then just building on them as your own journey goes along. So I think all of us have a pretty big role to play. I see some questions popping up, so maybe we can take a few and wrap it up, because I think we also have a time limit to
Yeah.
finish the session.
Let's do that. Let's do that, Kamal. And okay, so there is a question from Lakshya Sandwani. What are your views and key actions you have seen relating to adoption of green policies and initiatives in logistics and supply chain?
So honestly, apart from a lot of work happening on the packing material, especially like I mentioned, this recycling of waste, and mostly it goes into the outer packaging, which obviously is part of the supply chain and logistics thing, and obviously then looking at the whole, electric transportation and cutting down fuel emission. We haven't seen that much of activity in this space. So, Lakshay, if there are some ideas or some opportunities you have, or if you have some business imperatives that can help our industry, we are very happy to look at them and actually connect with some of our companies which could benefit from that. So
Thanks, Kamal.
yeah.
It reminds me of this investment made by a global fund in a company that is trying to figure out how we can make boxes which are more appropriate to the size of the product being shipped. So we often see Amazon boxes, small little item inside and a big box,
Yeah.
but a way of finding a way to make that more efficient. So not only do you become more sustainable, you use less cardboard, less paper, etc. But you also become more cost efficient because you're using a smaller package.
Yeah. In fact, Amazon, I see, and Flipkart, they have done a lot of work on this, and a lot of their packaging material. In fact, I am right now in the US. You can probably see the dark background behind me, and everything that Amazon is shipping here is completely recyclable. In fact, that's a mandate that they are following. So the bigger boys are starting to work on some of these things. How can now we influence and inculcate that habit into our D2C brands, and who can do it at a smaller scale? Like you said, it's almost again an industry initiative required to help drive that. In fact, we are working with a large packaging company called Parsons, and trying to find solutions for especially for the movement of large packaging material, which can be more
Okay.
sustainable.
So that is actually linked to another question we have from Vedant Memani, who wants to know about any brands or companies that deal with recycled plastic
Sure.
packaging.
I have actually got some notes here which I will mention. Um, so there is a company called Lucro, somebody that we have actually started working with, which, like I said, they actually work with rag pickers, and they are based in Gujarat. And they actually get the collection from a very large number of rag pickers, and they then have a beautiful process of separating them and creating recycled plastic material, which they have used very effectively in bottles, especially packaging material which doesn't directly come in touch with food, for example, because there you have to have very different standards. But shrink wrapping of bottles, the inner layer of plastic bottles where the outer layers are still virgin, but the inner layer can be recycled. So this is one specific example that I can quote of a company called Lucro. And I see another question here about some checklist for D2C startups. So what we will do is, we are working on a list, Shruti, that you have asked for what should be done, and even some of these company names who we are partnering with. We will actually publish that shortly, not only on our website, but we will also work with publications like Inc. 42 and others to see if they are able to, or they are open to disseminating that, because we are really keen to spread the word and just build these stories. So Shruti, just give us a little bit more time. We have just started working on this checklist, and we'll have it out for everyone's benefit very soon.
Then, Kamal, there's one more question which is also very close to my heart. WINPI is a partner to UN Women's Industry Disruptor, where we also invited Dipanjan from Fireside
Okay,
to
nice.
be a part of one of the sessions. But that is where we are working with a lot of women entrepreneurs who are coming up with sustainable solutions in the fashion, lifestyle, apparel value chain. And some of them had a similar question. It was about how do you really market a sustainable slash eco-friendly D2C consumer brand? I mean, how do you build that brand value, which is based on sustainability as the ethos?
So, my simple answer is that today the consumer is looking for those stories. So you make your story around sustainability, around eco-friendliness, around solving a bigger problem than just a great value prop to the consumer, as a part of the brand narrative itself. And I think the most interesting example that I have seen globally, and again, I'm experiencing it live sitting in San Francisco right now, is this company called Allbirds, where they built an entirely sustainable brand of footwear, and now they have all kinds of fashion and apparel products, where the center of the story was sustainability. It was about taking wool from New Zealand, from sheep, and then the whole value chain was built around that. and they are now a listed company. I think $4 or $5 billion in market cap, and you see their packaging material, everything just talks about how it's good for the environment, how it's good for you. So I think storytelling is part of every brand's ethos. I mean, literally, that's how you build the connect with the consumer. If you can integrate your story of sustainability, integrate with the story of how, and not make it into just a marketing spiel. You have to live by it. So the fact that you're planting trees, you can't be shouting at rooftops and saying, I'm planting trees, so buy me. But the fact that you're doing things like these is so important for the consumer. We sometimes, underestimate the power of the consumer's response to things like this. So I would say celebrate these things, and the consumers love being part of that journey with you. And like I said earlier, I would not be surprised if they're even willing to pay a premium to be associated with a brand which is conscious, which is doing things deliberately, both for the environment and for societal good.
Kamal, I think that's fantastic because I still remember how it started, with the Nike scandal long time back, with that picture of that little boy in Pakistan, this whole scandal about child labor, where consumers took to the streets to protest and boycotted the brand. And all the way today to consumers being willing to pay a premium for a brand that is more responsible and, friendly to the earth. I think it's fantastic to see that evolution, and it has been a great conversation with you. Thank you very much. I think we are also out of time,
No, my pleasure.
and Vinny's here.
Very
Thank you both so much for such an insightful session. I mean, from a consumer's perspective, if I may, I would completely agree with your point on how people have become conscious of what they're using and they like to take well informed decisions. I mean, I do too. So I'm sure a lot of people out there actually do that. Anyways, it was an absolute pleasure having you here with us. And yes, we will definitely look forward to this checklist for D2C brands for sustainable solutions, Kaval.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us. And like my last message to everyone still is the same. Start small, start with one small thing, and it'll just become a groundswell.
Great, great. Thank you
I
so much again.
absolutely echo that. Absolutely echo that. Let's start influencing our own little ecosystems, and that will create a wave of change. And thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Vinny. It's been a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. Likewise, Nakaval and Nupur. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.